Welcome to Spotlight ETSU. I'm your host, Carrie Oliveira. Today we'll be speaking with Fred Sauceman, a Southern foodie who has been published in numerous magazines, newspapers, and books. His columns appear regularly in the Johnson City Press and Blue Ridge Country magazine. He also appears in a monthly segment on WJHL. Thank you for joining us, Fred.
Thank you for having me.
I'm so excited to talk to you. I like anybody who likes food, so that's kind of exciting. The way I like to start these interviews is to talk about how it is that you came to be at ETSU. So how long have you been here and how did you get here?
I've been here a long time. I actually came here as a student in the 1970s and finished a BA in English and History and an MA in English in 1980, right before the university converted from quarters to semesters. So a lot of us hurried up and finished our graduate degrees.
I didn't know we were ever on a quarter system.
Yeah, we were until the fall of 1980. So I went to work for a community college for 5 years and came back here in 1985 to head up the university relations office, and I've been here ever since.
Oh, and you said earlier that you retired for about 7 days,
yeah,
and then came back.
Yeah, being in the state system so long, 32 years, of course I can do that.
Right.
I did retire December 31st, 2012, and came back to work on January 7th, 2013.
You got bored in a week?
Well, I started doing some different things. Instead of administrative work, focusing more on the creative things that I really enjoy here.
Oh, so you were able to sort of shift your energy when you sort of restarted your career.
Yeah, and go back to my roots in radio. I started in radio when I was 15 years old in Greenville.
How do you get a job in radio at 15?
Well, actually, my mother got me in the door, and this was back during the era of the Vietnam War. And I read stories out of the newspaper on my audition tape and was able to pronounce the Vietnamese names in there, so that helped me get the job.
That's a good way to get a job.
I had a rock and roll show on Saturday night and Sunday night. My mother drove me to work because being under 16, I couldn't drive a car. And I've had a hand in radio ever since. And part of the new job is to be news director at WETS and produce and read newscasts every day.
How do you decide what you're going to put on the radio?
For our clientele, our audience, we look at education, we look at the economy, not wrecks and murders so much.
Less of that.
Stories that have a wide impact on people's pocketbook, on people's lifestyle, on people's attitude.
That makes a lot of sense. So how is it that you came to be mostly writing about food?
Well, ever since my first essay at the University of Tennessee when I was a freshman, I thought deep inside I wanted to write. And I wanted to write about my place, which is Appalachia.
Right.
And food sort of became the entree to do that. I grew up in Greene County, which is a heavily agricultural county. I grew up, although my parents, my mother's parents were in town. My father's parents were sharecroppers.
Oh.
So I've always been very connected to the land.
Right.
Even my mother's parents who lived in town talked about gardening and farming all the time. So I've been around people who are very close to the land.
Even in suburbia, sort of relative suburbia.
Yeah, who had a deep respect for the land, who talked about country ham, who talked about seed potatoes, who talked about green beans, making kraut.
Seed potatoes?
Yeah, I've always had a respect for
Wait,
for
what's
that.
a seed potato?
A potato that you put in the ground and
little
grow.
baby potatoes that grow
sure,
potatoes.
Sure.
I don't garden or farm or anything. This is all totally foreign to me. So yes, doing all that sort of thing is just part of the culture.
Yeah, and the media work came together with the interest in food, and along about 2000 with a big cookbook we did for ETSU, 6-pound cookbook, my food writing career got started.
How many pages is a 6-pound book?
Oh my gosh, it's about 600, 700 pages.
Like really?
It's a collection of recipes from people who were affiliated with the university. It was published in 2000.
Where can I get it?
You can get it through WETS. It's sold there as a fundraiser.
Oh my goodness, how much does it cost?
It's $15 for that big a book, so it's a good buy. But anyway, it's full of stories, not just recipes.
Oh!
Every book I've done that does include some recipes, I've always linked those recipes to a story.
Yeah. Well, I mean, because that's what makes food interesting. I know that, like, I'm from Hawaii originally, and I have Portuguese and Puerto Rican ancestry. And what I like about living in Appalachia is that the culture here is very similar to the culture I grew up with back home. And food is always a really big thing where people sort of like come together in celebration or whatever else. And so food becomes part very much a focal point in a culture. And so it's very hard, I would imagine, to talk about food in the absence of talking about the larger cultural context in which the food is taking place and what it means to people.
Yeah, look at the paper, for example, and notice the number of dinners that are held in this area by Ruritan clubs, by churches. There's something happening virtually every weekend. Our church in Jonesboro does a monthly potluck, and you may find Cuban lechon asado, roast pork, you may find deviled eggs, you may find fresh asparagus, everything there on that table. And it's celebrated at that church once a month.
That is so cool to me. Oh, and it sounds so delicious. So you have written all kinds of interesting things. You have like entries in encyclopedias and whatever else. Do you have a particular, I know that you talk about food sort of relative to Appalachian culture, but is there a particular food genre, is that the right word?
Sure, that's a good word.
That you're particularly interested in? I mean, aside from Appalachian food.
I get a lot of assignments that relate to barbecue, for example. That's certainly not strictly an Appalachian food, nor a Southern food.
No, not particularly.
But I'm just fascinated by barbecue culture.
Why is that?
Well, it's so localized now. John Shelton Reed, a good friend of mine who taught sociology at UNC Chapel Hill for many years, has written a lot about barbecue. And he says barbecue is like the wines and cheeses of Europe. In the South, if you drive 100 miles, the barbecue changes.
Totally different.
Yeah, and I can show you on maps how the sauces are different in particular parts of the South, how the cuts of meat are different, how the techniques are different. So in this world of homogenization, thankfully, barbecue still has that regional, no pun intended, flavor.
So do you suppose that the differences in barbecue are particularly related to the geography? Like they will put things in the barbecue that are most prevalent in the agricultural environment?
Sure, that's the reason we cook with hickory wood here, because that's what we have, that's what's close by. That's what Ridgewood uses in Bluff City, because there's hickory trees all around the Prophet property there.
Right.
So certainly, yeah. And when you get into eastern North Carolina barbecue and you see the sauce made of vinegar and pepper, you know, there's a reason for that too, because that barbecue tradition, the whole hog with the sour flavoring, came out of the Caribbean, where the pig was marinated and sauced with citrus.
Yes.
Well, when that tradition gets into North Carolina, guess what? No lemon trees, no sour orange trees.
So we have to substitute.
So you substitute, and there's your vinegar.
Oh my goodness, I'm learning so much. How do you explain dry rubs then? Memphis barbecue.
Memphis barbecue.
Love.
I'll tell you, the restaurant in Memphis that has really popularized dry rub is Charlie Vergas Rendezvous. And
I've been to the Rendezvous.
And that's an interesting restaurant in terms of barbecue culture, because it's urban barbecue. It's right downtown.
Yes, it is.
Most of these barbecue joints you'll find on state lines, you'll find on county lines, rural areas. This one's right downtown, not far from the Peabody.
Insanely urban area.
And the other thing that's curious about it, it's Greek-owned.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah. So that's what's fascinating to me about Southern food. There's so many influences that come together to create what we put on the table. It's so complex, and I think you can easily argue that it's the most complex food system in America.
I had never thought about food that way. I mean, I always definitely linked like the experience of culture and family, whatever else, to the consumption and creation of food, but not that it was sort of a record of cultural features.
And Southern food is a great combination of what was here and what was brought here.
Right.
One of my friends in the food writing world, John Edgerton, wrote a book called Southern Food, and I use it in my class. He says Southern food was born when those English pigs met Native American corn in 17th century Virginia. Pigs weren't here. Pigs were imported into the lower South by the Spanish and the upper South by the English. And of course the corn was here. The beans were here. My students, we talk about corn and pigs so much in my class, Foodways of Appalachia. My students nicknamed the class the Pigs and Corn class. But think about how those two things kept us alive in the South.
Sincerely. And what I think is really interesting about pigs, pork in general, like pork is a really big part of like Hawaiian food culture also, not indigenous, right? Clearly imported by colonists and whatnot, but then it ultimately became incredibly important to the, like once they arrived, it became a very important food element in the culture. And Is that because they like reproduce easily, or?
They do reproduce easily. They're inexpensive to raise. Their weight multiplies very fast. In colonial times, oftentimes people who owned pigs didn't even inventory those pigs. They just let them run wild. Where you might find horses listed on documents and inventories, pigs were rarely ever listed. They just ran loose. But you're talking about Hawaii and pork, the Kahlua pig. I mean, that's very much a barbecue tradition. So barbecue is worldwide.
Kahlua as barbecue.
I've got a great picture I show my class when we talk about barbecue. It's from Lynchburg, Tennessee, where they have the Jack Daniel's International Barbecue Cook-Off. And here's this guy cooking barbecue. He has no shoes on. He's barefoot. Right? And
I feel like that's probably very unsafe.
There's a flag in front of him, and it says Estonian National Barbecue Association. So barbecue is everywhere. He goes all the way from this Baltic Republic to Lynchburg, Tennessee to cook barbecue in competition.
How does he do?
Well, he does okay. You got to be a pro pretty much to get into that one anyway. You need to have won several competitions to qualify for what they call the Jack, which is sponsored by the Kansas City Barbecue Society. You'll see teams there from Canada, from Jamaica, from Germany. One year I judged it. The Germans won the pork shoulder competition.
That is so cool that you're judging a barbecue contest. Okay, I have a question related to that issue. I have a friend who is from Alabama. He's actually one of our faculty in communication. And he insists that he can't find good barbecue in this area.
Oh, my goodness.
But it's because of a preference, right? It's like sort of a cultural I don't know what particularly you might know about Alabama barbecue better than I do. And so what is he missing here? And where can I send him to get good barbecue that's going to make him happy?
Well, if he's looking for... One of the things that's distinctive about Alabama barbecue, it depends on where he comes from in Alabama. If he's from North Alabama,
is it that specific?
Then he may be used to a white barbecue sauce.
Oh.
Now, we know who created that sauce.
He's from Tuscaloosa.
Close.
Okay. We
know who created that white sauce. Big Bob Gibson in 1925, and the restaurant's still open in Decatur, Alabama. He gave the recipe out freely. And if you go to Dixie Barbecue here in Johnson City, you'll find that white sauce. So Alabama barbecue varies by region. It's hard to say there is an Alabama barbecue. It's it's hard to say there's a Texas barbecue. People think, well, Texas barbecue is brisket. Not just brisket. In eastern Texas, you've got pork brought into that part of the state by African Americans who worked the cotton fields. You do have the brisket. In areas like Lockhart and Luling and New Braunfels, you have sausage brought into that area by Germans and Czechs. So barbecue, we tend to make generalizations about barbecue.
Sure.
Almost everything you say about barbecue, you got to append an asterisk to. So it depends on where he is in Alabama. But you may not find barbecue here like you would find it in Tuscaloosa, like you'd find it at ribs in Tuscaloosa, but I guarantee you can find good barbecue here, and one of the places is, of course, the Ridgewood.
That place is legendary. I think that I was probably in Johnson City, this is not an exaggeration, I think I was in Johnson City for about a week and a half before I heard about Ridgewood barbecue, and I can't say I've ever been. I'm not a huge fan of barbecue, apparently, though I am, just not Appalachian barbecue, maybe.
Yeah.
But yeah, the place is legendary. Why is that?
Well, it's been around so long. First of all, it opened in 1948. And secondly, because of what they do with barbecue. Going back to Alabama for a second, you've got the ribs, you've got a lot of pork shoulder. You won't find either one at Ridgewood. If you're looking for ribs and shoulder, go somewhere else.
What am I going to get at Ridgewood?
The pork that you're going to get at Ridgewood is fresh ham, which is a more expensive cut of meat. And they take that ham. There's no gas or electricity used at Ridgewood. It's wood, smoke, fire. The old way. They'll take that ham and cook it over hickory wood, oftentimes from the nearby farms, about 9 hours, and then rub it with a spice blend and chill it. And then they'll slice it and warm it up on that grill.
Yeah.
With Ridgewood barbecue sauce. I'll quote John Shelton Reed again.
Okay.
John Shelton Reed did a book on North Carolina barbecue, and the only out-of-state place he mentioned was Ridgewood in Tennessee. But of that Ridgewood sauce, John says, this is what ketchup will taste like in heaven. It's sweet and sour, it's slightly spicy,
Oh.
North Carolina folks argue about how to take that meat off the bone, how to cut it up.
There's a debate about even how to remove it from the bone?
Oh, sure. Minced, chopped, sliced, all those options are discussed sometimes vehemently in North Carolina. At Ridgewood, there's no choice. That ham is sliced and sliced only.
Oh.
This is, and barbecue always, when I bring up the subject, when I do talks, invariably it starts an argument, and that's okay. One of the reasons it starts an argument is the fact that it's so localized. People are so passionate about what they grew up with.
Right.
You think the best barbecue is the barbecue that's closest to your back door, usually. Yeah.
Because it's like mom's, probably.
But I teach my students to be ecumenical about barbecue, to appreciate yellow sauce in South Carolina, white sauce in Alabama, mutton in Kentucky.
What are yellow and white sauce's primary ingredient?
Well, the yellow sauce, and again, we know who created that. The Bessinger family, German name, in South Carolina, and the predominant ingredient, of course, is mustard. The white sauce in Alabama, the major ingredient is mayonnaise. And Big Bob Gibson started out with that white sauce in the kitchen. They actually use this word, they would baptize their chickens in that white sauce. People liked the white sauce so well, it migrated out of the kitchen onto the table.
Oh.
And now they put it on everything.
Oh, it's like the condiment of choice.
There's even a guy there at Big Bob's in Decatur, Alabama, who squirts it on pie.
Oh, no. Oh, that threw me off. That's too weird. We have some photographs of work that you've done, related to work that you've done. So I want to talk some about that. I've gotten a thorough schooling on barbecue. I had no idea.
I brought a picture of the place setting books, the series of books I've done on Appalachian foodways. And some people insist on calling those cookbooks. They aren't. They are collections of stories and essays about Appalachian food with some recipes included. And there are 3 books in that series called The Place Setting, Timeless Tastes of the Mountain South, from Bright Hope to Frog Level. And Bright Hope and Frog Level are places. Yeah, Bright Hope is in Greene County, where my parents live. And Frog Level is actually in Virginia. It's a place, there's one in North Carolina too.
Frog Level.
Frog Level, yes. The story is a couple of guys were out fishing one night and the fog got low, and one of them said, that fog is so low it's down to frog level, and the name stuck.
Because good nicknames will do that. So, what did you say the name of your course was?
The course is called The Foodways of Appalachia.
The Foodways of Appalachia. And
it's offered once a year. It's offered in the fall, 4 o'clock on Wednesdays. It starts,
always.
Yeah, it starts late August. It fills up usually in April. But it's offered through Appalachian Studies and Sociology and Anthropology. One of the other shots I brought along was a shot of a book I edited called Cornbread Nation 5, The Best of Southern Food Writing.
There are so many syllables in these titles. I will never remember those.
This is a series of books started by an organization that I think very highly of called the Southern Foodways Alliance at the University of Mississippi. And they collect oral histories. They do this book series. They have a symposium every fall. They do field trips in the summer. And this organization has had as much impact as anything else on the renewed appreciation for Southern food. So every couple of years or so, the organization publishes a book in the Cornbread Nation series collecting the best of Southern food writing for roughly a year to 2 year period.
So is this, again, more essays and...
It is. There are a few recipes in there, too. I have a piece in there on Dr. Enough, the soft drink that's been produced here in Johnson City since the late 40s.
I have never had a Dr. Enough. Am I missing out? Do I need to go have one this afternoon?
If you need a big jolt of caffeine, yeah, go for a Dr. Enough. It's heavily caffeinated.
Oh.
It's not made with high fructose corn syrup. It's made with pure cane sugar. Yeah, they claim, the people who produce this drink, that it was America's first energy drink, long before Red Bull or any of those products. And
none of which smell good.
Yeah, well, Dr. Enough, it's really a drink that has its feet in 3 centuries, because clearly the claims that have been made for that drink harken back to the 19th century patent medicines, what they claim to have cured. Although there's no alcohol in Dr. Enough.
Right.
Well, it was created in the 20th century And now in the 21st century, it's marketed as a new age nutraceutical.
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 So very natural, homeopathic sort of thing, kind of thing?
Well, it's not a word that the government has put any specificity to yet. It's a marketing term right now. But it describes a feel-good type drink.
Well, I mean,
and with that much caffeine, you're going to feel
good.
Different, at least. And it's full of vitamin B complex, too.
Which is good for people.
Yeah, and when it was introduced in the 1940s, a Coke would cost you a nickel, and a Dr. Enough would cost you a quarter. People thought they were getting something of value there, and it actually had to be rationed.
No.
Yeah.
Little Dr. Enough from Johnson City, Tennessee that nobody ever heard of?
Yeah, the formula was invented by a chemist in Chicago. His co-workers were complaining of lethargy, being tired all the time.
Right.
So he comes up with this concoction with a lot of caffeine, a lot of sugar, and a lot of vitamin B. And then Charles Gordon from Johnson City comes back after World War II and sees an ad in a beverage magazine and buys that formula, and that's how the company got started.
And they have been here since what year did you say?
1949.
1949.
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot of longevity for... I've never seen Dr. Enough anywhere else, and I've lived in Hawaii and Michigan, and I've traveled around, and it's the only place I've ever seen it. Why do they not export?
Well, apparently they're doing fine. It's very limited in its distribution, but the internet has helped sales as well. It's like Ale 81 in Kentucky, another regional soft drink that's even older than Dr. Enough. You could only find it in the eastern part of Kentucky, lower Indiana, but now they sell all over via the internet. The internet, ironically, this new technology has saved so many of these old companies like country ham producers, soft drink producers.
I find that so interesting, right? So you have modern technology sort of helping the survival of Southern food things. And what I find interesting about that is that lately in the news, or a lot in the news, you hear about obesity, and that the way that Southerners eat contributes to a decline in health or whatever else. And I would just really be curious to hear your thoughts on A, whether you think that's true or not, and B, is it a good thing, really, if it is true that we're perpetuating Southern food if it's not really all that great for us?
Well, Southern food
is delicious, though.
Can be bad for you, but
so could anything
doesn't
else,
have to be. I mean, it's back to that key word Julia Child used all the time, moderation.
Mm-hmm.
The sweet potato, for example, which is a major part of the Southern diet, is one of the healthiest things you can eat.
True.
And greens, for example.
Right.
And when you're eating country ham, which is fairly salty usually, you're not going to eat an 8-ounce piece of country ham. You're going to eat a smaller portion of country ham because it's so rich,
right,
so intense in its flavor. So, if you learn to balance those things, Southern food can be awfully good for you.
Everything in balance.
Yeah, that's right. Now, I don't eat Ridgewood barbecue every week.
No.
I don't drink a Dr. Enough a day. But that doesn't keep me from having an appreciation for those things and trying them on occasion.
Sure, because and that's the sort of thing I feel weird about it. I feel very much at home in Johnson City because, again, culturally it's very similar to Hawaii. But there are certain things I haven't availed myself to, particularly the food. Like, I've never been to Ridgewood. I've never had a Dr. Enough. And so I feel like suddenly you're bringing to my attention that I'm missing out on sort of important elements of the culture here.
Well, there's another company that opened here about the same time Dr. Enough did, and it makes fried pies. And it's off Walnut Street. It's a nondescript building. It's called Seaver's Bakery, and they manufacture various flavors of fried pies and sell them at Food City. Yeah. In fact, it's funny you bring that up because the labels all say fruit pies.
Yeah.
And even the chocolate one says fruit pie. So
chocolate's a fruit.
Chocolate's
it's a bean.
been reclassified. It's okay to eat more chocolate as a fruit, I guess. But yeah, thanks to companies like Food City, products like that have been kept alive.
Surviving.
Yeah.
Is Southern food keeping Southern culture alive in some ways? I mean, with homogeneity, right? You made reference to sort of homogeneity in general and cultural homogeneity. The more that people move around in the country, the more that we see sort of a blending and fuzzing up of individual cultures. Do you suppose that food is helping keep Appalachia in existence, like culturally?
Absolutely. There's no question about it. Leah Chase, who's the grand dame of Creole cookery in New Orleans, says the best way to know a person is through food. And so the best way to know a culture, I think, is through food and through music and through religion.
Yes.
Look at the way those three things
all
are
related
tied
to
together.
each other.
Absolutely. I love to write about food and music and how they're connected. I've done a lot of work on the Carter family in Southwest Virginia and their food traditions, which might surprise you.
Are the Carter family food traditions particular as opposed to like regional? Like, are they more macro specific?
They're very regional in most ways, but there is an anomaly in there. And that anomaly I found out about was the Carter family's love for ravioli.
What?
Yeah.
How did something like that happen?
If you had a holiday meal, Thanksgiving or Christmas, with the Carter family in Southwest Virginia, you'd be as likely to have ravioli as you would ham or turkey.
It doesn't really go.
Well,
culinarily speaking, like it doesn't go.
Sarah Carter, who was married to A.P. Carter, the first family of country music, when they divorced and Sarah took up with A.P.'s first cousin, they moved to quite a story in Scott County, Virginia in the 1930s. They moved to California, and Sarah and her husband lived next to an Italian family, and she learned all about ravioli and learned to make it from scratch. And her descendants have Sarah's ravioli roller and cutter and her recipe for ravioli, and they still make that, and it's absolutely the best ravioli.
I was just going to ask you if you've had the Carter family ravioli.
Oh yeah, I have, and it's inside the pasta is spinach, cheese, and chicken. The sauce is tomato, more chicken, beef, and mushrooms. It's wonderful.
There's no way for that to be bad.
You know, I love quirky stories like that, stories you wouldn't expect.
No, I didn't expect ravioli,
So
certainly from the
I
Carter
was probably the first person actually to publish that story. But it reminded Sarah Carter and her husband of the tomato dumplings they used to have back in the mountains of Southwest Virginia. That's how it resonated with them. And Jeanette Carter, Sarah and A.P.'s daughter, made it for years. She hated to make it. She fussed about it, but she kept it alive.
Right.
And she gave the recipe over the phone to her daughter-in-law. Funny thing, you have to know Jeanette Carter. She would say that the filling is right when it looks like goose droppings.
Oh, again, nah, I can't be okay with that. that's dreadful. I have a really strong appreciation for even just family culture passing on with recipes. One of the things that my dad's family does is we make a spice cake at Christmas time, and for some reason, he didn't think that my sister and I were going to carry on the tradition. I'm not married, and so he was like, oh, you have no family, you have no reason to make this. And it like broke his heart, the idea that this recipe was going to stop with his generation. And so we've made it a point to make sure that we carry on like the war cake and the sweet bread. Portuguese sweet bread is really important. My grandmother's Puerto Rican rice, and it keeps us connected to where we came from.
Absolutely. Well, thankfully, I sat down with Sarah Carter, or not Sarah, Jeanette Carter, several years before she died, and Jeanette showed me how to make the family recipe for chow chow, and we have that recipe.
Oh, that is one of my favorite things ever.
Yeah, Jeanette always made chow chow in the fall. Of course, that's a way, that relish, if you're not familiar with chow chow, you are, but
yes.
if viewers aren't, it's a relish.
Yes.
And it's a way to perpetuate the goodness of the garden.
You're going to have to finish this story later because we are so out of time right now, but I definitely want to hear the end of this. I want to thank you so much for joining us today. I wish we had more time to talk to you. We've been speaking today with Fred Sauceman about his experiences with Southern food. Please join us next time on Spotlight ETSU.